On the podcast today, we are going to speak about why life is suffering and how to find happiness. Now, this is some ancient knowledge that goes way back, obviously, into India and China, into Asia in general. And we find this particularly in Buddhism, where the Buddha would explain that life is suffering. But then he went on to explain, why we suffer and also a way out of that to end suffering, basically. So Buddhism essentially, like actually Taoism and Hinduism, are systems or technologies used to end suffering. And a lot of the time, and a lot of the reasons, I should say, why we suffer is because of our identity, which we'll unpack today. And we will speak about also two types of happiness, which we'll get into later, of why, two types of happiness in the world that a lot of people are caught in either form. So
seems to be we are more leaning into one type of happiness more than the other.
Exactly.
Which cause actually more suffering.
Yes, yes. And again, that's what the Buddha was talking about, right? That's why the second noble truth, which we'll get into, is why it's craving and seeking. And so suffering itself, like as we are born as a physical being, right? Like we all encounter physical and mental suffering. Like you could punch me in the face and I'll experience some form of suffering, or you could say something to hurt my feelings if I have a lot of beliefs, for example, which leads to a lot of mental suffering. And in some sense, like if you're objective to that experience, you don't feel any suffering at all, but it's that individual that feels the entire suffering, right? Like,
again, the birth of suffering is the birth of our physical body,
yes,
isn't it? Like when we just punch ourselves and pinch ourselves, and we feel the pain, right? That's the evidence of the you being alive, and evidence of the possibility of the you will experience suffering, right? So that when you find somebody who are like lost the consciousness or something, you always hit in the face or pinch that person if that person is alive or not, right? So that's almost like being alive, or life itself is suffering. Life equals suffering, right? So we need to understand that the birth of suffering and suffering itself and suffering of our own leads to understanding of suffering of others.
yes,
right?
yes,
So in saying that, if we are not aware of our own suffering, leads into not knowing others' suffering.
Yes.
So that leads into the very dangerous place,
Yes.
right? We can be very violent to one another without feeling anything, right? We lose sense of feeling others' suffering because we're not acknowledging our own suffering.
yes,
Could be psychological suffering or physical suffering.
yes.
Not being aware of it will lead to extreme cruelty, possibly.
Well said, love. It's interesting because on the spiritual path, as you become more aware of yourself and you go deeper into your mind and understand your psychosomatic organism, naturally things like, as they speak about in Buddhism and Taoism and Hinduism, of like compassion, forgiveness and empathy, and these things naturally arise, humility, which Taoism would argue are actually intrinsic traits, natural intrinsic traits that we just, maybe our suffering eclipses most of the time. But it's interesting that the suffering actually evokes that. So what I'm saying is like what you were saying, like because we understand our own suffering, so then we can empathize with others.
Right.
We can empathize with other people because they're suffering as well.
Yeah.
You see? So then you have more compassion, more humility, forgiveness, love.
Yeah.
And this is why it's kind of strange. Suffering is kind of paradoxical because within suffering there's love. Because once you understand your own suffering, then you open up this well of love within yourself that can empathize with others and the world and what have you, right?
And that's so intrinsic to our own nature, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Like, and this may lead into these two types of happiness, that world is only becoming more rational, and leading into categorical thinking and overly rationalizing, analytical thinking, which actually makes you become numb to these feelings, right? You become numb to your own suffering. That means that you become numb to having compassion and love to yourself and others, right?
Exactly.
And that is what has been happening for a long time, I think.
Yeah.
And that's why Buddha emphasized these things,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that existed back in the day when he was alive too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's why he came up with this kind of conclusion and awakening.
Yes. Well, look at it's a great point, because if you look at the landscape of social media at the minute, right, where you see a lot of this cancer culture nonsense and this and that, where like someone may do something that a lot of people don't agree with, and then all of these unknown people will condemn that person. They have a lack of empathy for how that person, no matter what that person did, right? So they have a lack of empathy for that individual themselves, and that individual is going to mentally suffer. And unfortunately, we've seen people commit suicide and suffer from great depression and that, from having the weight of public shaming upon them. And that is a lack of empathy, a lack of compassion, forgiveness, and, let's be frank, a lack of love for your fellow brother or sister. And so we all make stupid mistakes, right, in life. And this is what people don't understand, that we all make a mistake, we do wrong things, and that doesn't mean we should be on trial on social media and condemned. And that's not natural to be like that.
Yeah, it's very sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Again, social media is not online world; it's virtual world, which is not really real.
Yeah.
I don't think.
No.
So, for some reason, people have this very strong arrogance and confidence that they can treat other people like, crap.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, that such ignorance brings a lack of compassion and love, and they don't really care about other people's feelings at all.
No.
And I don't think it necessarily was like that from the beginning of this online world. It wasn't really like that. Online world was never really like that. But more, the internet had a progression, and social media came about, and smartphones and this and that, so that we always get to access to these platforms, and you can post whatever you want, that you can talk about things whatever you want, so that the accessibility of these things allow people to, I think, have this feeling of numbness of others' feeling and themselves, and they just go wild.
Yeah. Well, I've had people wishing death upon me, you know what I mean, as you know. So, and you and I don't really speak about anything controversial on...
That's just psychotic.
Psychotic, yeah. But the difference is that, I mean, for someone else who might be like overly sensitive without any sort of understanding, they may take that completely the wrong way. For myself, I see that individual they're in a place of pain themselves. They are suffering, and they're projecting their suffering onto me. And so for myself, obviously I don't reply to those sorts of emails and comments, but I try to empathize with that person. Maybe they feel inadequate because for whatever reason, I have a lot of knowledge on the subject, and they don't feel, up to par, or I might have said something to hurt their feelings, or we can open up the floodgates of what that person might be going through. But the important thing is to not take it personally, because that person themselves are in a certain state of suffering.
Yes.
And you don't want to actually contribute to their suffering. I know that sounds paradoxical, because they're the one projecting their suffering onto you and maybe making you suffering.
Yep.
But they obviously are in a pretty dark place to speak to a stranger in that sort of way.
Ill-mannered way.
Yeah.
But in that way, the way you take it is a very healthy and very understanding way of taking it. But most people don't take it that way, as you know. They
No, of course I know.
just instantly bite back, right? And a lot of the cases leads into, like you mentioned, depression and even suicide, right?
Yeah.
And again, there's a analysis on it. It's a fact the fact that around the world, the teen suicide is going up and up. And as I am aware of, that what's happening in Korea, for example, that suicide is not a thing anymore.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's that, so society became that numb to this the general public's depression and the mental state, which is very alarming, actually.
It is. Well, there's some governments around the world, Australia is one of them, are looking at ways to circumvent this problem with social media and this and that. For example, if someone does suffer from, this is a hypothetical, right? But if someone does suffer from depression or, unfortunately commit suicide and this and that, the people who are commenting this and that Google have an obligation to give their address, their name, and they will be questioned. So so you see, you're getting back to more of the real life of how it would work in the real life, right? Because in the real life, if you had people knocking on your door, shouting at you and this and that, those people would get locked up and put in jail. But for whatever reason, because social media is new, we haven't quite worked out how this works. We're just letting it, it's kind of like the Wild Wild West, right? Where everyone's just spouting off whatever they want. And with a lack of care, like you said, about that person's feelings. And so, but this will change with what I'm saying, with a lot of these things, because then, someone may think they're cool with their Cheetos all over their face in their basement, in their grandma's basement, like abusing everyone. But the next minute they get a knock on the door by the police and they have a please explain. You know what I mean? This person died because of your comment, so forth and so on. So, but the whole fact of the matter is it's all suffering, right? It's all suffering. It's suffering that the person is experiencing. It's suffering from the person who's projecting the aggression and so forth and so on. It's all suffering.
And the primary reason why the suffering and pain is only increasing and increasing is because the way the world is going is only solidifying the sense of I, the identity, right? What do you do, first of all, to start a social media account? Set up an ID. You need to type up your name, your phone number, or whether female, male, or these email addresses and these details of your own. Then that's how you set up your profile and you start an account, right?
Yeah, of course.
So the ever-increasing pain and suffering is coming from that. I think it just the world is only solidifying the sense of I. And the funny thing is, you may already aware of that's not a real world, but from doing so, you subconsciously submitting to identifying yourself as your name and your gender and your look and this and that, right? So we unconsciously we act accordingly, so that only make your idea and sense of I more concrete. And that only going to lead to more suffering and more pain. Your life becomes more miserable. It's no way around it.
This is actually Hans-Georg Maueller and Paul D'Ambrosio's idea of prophilicity. So prophilicity is this new concept of where we have profiles, so we live through our profiles, which are basically our images. Right. They're just an image of how you think you should appear to other people. But we know, especially you and I know, because we've taken people on tours and stuff like that, and we've met a lot of people through my work. And a lot of people can be very insincere, like the image they portray on social media and who they are in real life are two completely different things. And if you want to know more about that, I highly recommend a book called You and Your Profile by Hans-Georg Maueller and Paul D'Ambrosio. But they get into that idea of that's actually another layer of the identity that we're actually building, as you were saying, this prophilicity where we're living through profiles. And I remember when you and I, we were on a spiritual retreat in Dharamsala I think back in 2009. We were living in India at the time. And I had a lot of friends from Australia going, man, you should try Facebook and, so we can keep in contact and this and that. And I didn't really get social media, so, and you knew me back in the day. And so I gave it a run, and then I was like on there just saying, this is more ego book.
Yeah.
This isn't, I mean, I don't understand the concept of Facebook, but this is more so ego book. Like, and I was telling them, I don't really have a story to tell.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't have much of a story to tell. Like, why would people be interested in my story anyway? You know, like, to be honest, right? Like,
Exactly.
why do they care that I'm in Dharamsala with you meditating in the Himalayas? Like, why would
people want to know about what you do?
Exactly. And ironically, I have Facebook now because of my work, and it is good to connect with people, but I think that if you get consumed by that concept of, it still is ego book. If you get consumed by the vanity metrics of the likes and the retweets and, you know, whatever these social media platforms have, then again, that's another path of suffering. You're going to continue to suffer because once you don't get the vanity metrics, once you don't get the positive reinforcement, then your life falls apart.
Exactly.
Because you've invested everything into this profile, into this identity, and you suffer, as you mentioned. You know?
It's a very sad thing, and we get tricked by all these things, and like you said, you want to promote yourself in a certain fashion, and but only more you contribute to that sort of perception, only more suffering and pain comes. There's no otherwise, really.
There's no other way, is there? There really is no other way.
Yeah.
So, in the end of the day, like when we unpack it all, right? Like you said, being alive means suffering. So, in a physical body means you are susceptible to suffering. You will suffer, but we have an innate desire, natural desire, obviously, to be happy. But the problem is, how do we define happiness? See, a lot of people define happiness through their possessions, through, you know, through their profile, you know, through their popularity, through the positive reinforcement, and we don't identify our happiness with just life as it is in its real rawest and simplest nature, to use Lao Tzu's terminology.
Yes. Yeah, what kind of happiness are we talking about here?
Yeah.
Right? Like, if we are talking about happiness in a sense to just cover that momentary pain and suffering that you're experiencing, but most cases that is what we define as what's happiness. So people simply like just gorging in junk food and drink soft drink all the time and watching movies one after the other, and that sort of freedom they have, they think that's some sort of happiness. And I mean, we all know that's not ultimate happiness. No. The ultimate happiness that what we're looking for is something that can be a bit more prolonged, right? Yeah. And like that contentment of just being satisfied with the life that you have, life that you're given. Yeah. That kind of contentment is what we're looking for here, right? And that will always become a remedy when you undergo a certain type of pain and suffering in the future as well, right? Instead of you seeking the seeking is the problem, isn't it? Like you constantly seek that basically pleasurable experience.
You feel you lack. You feel you lack in life because the socialization process of most countries, of most cultures and this and that, reinforcing that idea in your mind that you're not good enough, you're worthless. And it's all based on the idea of suffering, right? It's all based on that idea. But the thing is that, like, I think that people confuse happiness with also ecstasy and, you know, being ecstatic and, like, over the top joyful. And but, like, when you look at, like, if you look at the teachings of the Buddha, for example, he's not really saying happiness, he's saying contentment. He's saying the end of suffering leads to contentment, leads to nirvana. It means the candle is blown out, so you have this ultimate state of equanimity in your mind, which is symbolized through the Bhumi Sparsha Mudra, you know, where he's touching the earth, which means he is immovable now. He is in the ultimate place within consciousness, which cannot be moved by suffering. It can't even be moved by happiness. It's a state of ultimate contentment. And this is why in the Tao Te Ching also, why Lao Tzu says, do you know the contentment of contentment? And so this type of happiness is the happiness that resides in the East.
Yes.
It's in the simple forms of life. It's in not the seeking, not the achieving, not the validation of who you are.
Yes.
It's not a reinforcement of your identity, actually.
Yes. Well, that naturally leads into the two types of happiness that we were going to address, right?
Yep.
So the first type of happiness is what? Happiness that you have when you gain something. Could be material possessions or achieve goals and things like that. So it's very, let's say, capitalistic-oriented way of thinking, goal-based. Become a goal-getter and gain popularity and whatnot. And the type 2 happiness is a happiness that you experience from having less of any of it, or even none. Like less of possession, material possession, less goals, less seeking popularity and whatnot. So, or not at all, really.
Yeah.
That type of happiness. Again, the first kind of happiness is the idea came from the 18th century, from UK. The idea of individual happiness will lead to society's happiness. It's very very rational idea of happiness. If an individual feels happy from gaining something and achieve something, that will lead to society's happiness. Yes, it's not entirely untrue, but that's not totally true.
That's not the full picture, is it?
And again, that's very young idea of what we could think of happiness might be. Right.
Well, that goes back into the Enlightenment period, right? In Europe,
that's right.
It goes back into the Enlightenment period when we had the boom of rationality, and it's a product of rationality, actually, that idea, right? A product of individualism.
Yes.
But it's not the whole picture. I mean, sure, like it is a good thing that we have the freedom to naturally pursue our likes and avoid our dislikes as much as possible, but we notice that doesn't lead to any sort of ultimate happiness.
It only becomes a band-aid, right? Band-aid solution, very temporary pleasure, temporary fix, but it will never be a prolonged solution.
No. Yeah, it's interesting because in two of the videos that I've made, as you know, is about Taoism's aimlessness versus Western goals, success, and Western purpose. And a lot of the comments I get on those videos, particularly from Westerners who probably get subtly triggered by what we are speaking about, and again, they're blindsided that they think that there's one universal way of thinking, which is not, is that they make the false claim that having purpose and having a direction and achievement is actually, produces dopamine and has a healthy effect on the mind and this and that. And this is obviously not true because, as science does say, and as we all know, the more we've gone down that path, the more rates in depression and suicide and that have increased. And particularly in countries such as Korea, who are not naturally from that cognitive style. Korea's cognitive style is Eastern, which is a holistic cognitive style, which is based on relationships and context, rather than categories and objects, which is an individual cognition. And so, but even in saying that, the hyper version of that individual state of consciousness has only been around since the Enlightenment period. So 1800s, it's only been around since this time. It hasn't been there in the West forever. Even though the West have had an individualistic cognition, it hasn't been. A lot of times people think that the way it is now is the way it's always been. It's like, no, it's not. It hasn't been. Since the Enlightenment period, there's been this boom of rationality, and hence we have education, we have, science, and there's been a lot of boom. And, in and of themselves, there's nothing wrong with them.
Yes.
But the effects that they can have on the human mind can have long-term damage, particularly if we fall under that hypnosis that if we continue to gain, we're going to continue to be happy. But what we're noticing is we're addicted to seeking, as Buddha would say, and he knew this 2,500 years ago, which is why people always say he's the greatest psychologist of all time.
Right.
And so he understood this. But society, the world, education, even science are telling you, it's good for you to go out and gain and seek and this and that. But then we're all doing that, but we don't ever find this jewel in the crown. We don't find this happiness that society is telling you that you're going to get.
This rationality has its place, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think it plays a good role to the world what we have now. For example, large population and a lot of people are now educated and whatnot. But only that, I think. Only that, again, rationality is practical. And it plays its role when it comes to when things to be practical, when things to work, right? But when it meets to our nature and way we think, way we behave, and to live our best life, the happiest life we could, I think it's completely against it. I heard someone said that human creatures like to rationalizing things, but we are not rational creature.
No.
And that is to say, our human nature is more close to what Buddha was saying. That we are a holistic being, and when we let our rationality get better of ourselves, and this is what we experience, which is extreme suffering and pain. Again, coming from over-identifying ourselves with a certain concept, someone else told you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, this is why Zhuangzi, again, another great psychologist from 2,300 years ago, said that rationality itself is the problem. So the idea of Qing, of the species-specific essence within all creatures, he explained that the Qing is a flaw. So that means our ability to discern between this and that, which then that is the seed of likes and dislikes, good and bad, right and wrong, and our belief systems. And so that's actually what enhances rationality. So what happened in the Enlightenment period is they said lean into that. Where Zhuangzi was saying 2,300, 400 years ago, we need to down-regulate that. We need to fast the mind, actually, and get out of that habit. Because and one of his most beautiful quotes in the Zhuangzi text was when there's no more this and that, I reside in the still point of the Tao, and I see the infinite in all things. And so when you live in the mind that's constantly measuring rationality, you can't see the infinite in all things. And it's not a perceptual thing, it's a feeling, it's a sense where you have this openness, your consciousness is open to reality, and you feel one with the reality. It's a feeling. It's not a perceptual thing, it's a feeling. And all of those great traditions explain that. But we live in a world that's telling us to lean into rationality, which then continues to fragment the reality. And so then all we see is this, multicolored reality attuned to our beliefs and our likes and our dislikes and so forth and so on. And so you can't see the reality as it is. You definitely can't see your suffering and the suffering of others as they are.
Now the world had only became faster and faster, right? The competition of speed, who is quicker and who is going ahead and this and that. And we want to join the race and we want to win in that race, right? But as we all know, we can't catch up with the speed, right? But we are trying to catch up. But then side effect of that is depression, suicide, and anxiety problems, and psychological collapse and whatnot, right? So even the very act of that we are trying to keep up with the speed of the world, which is completely artificial and made by basically machine, it's not natural to us. That with the fact that we're trying to keep up with the speed itself is not natural, against our own nature. And we believe that we can catch up with this speed of the world to win the race, and to become, whatever, become rich and whatnot, become successful and achieve goals and this and that. But human evolution, our human body biologically, is not designed to catch up with the speed of the world. And it's the speed of the world, the machine, we can only create the faster and faster running cars, for example, because it's machine, right? But we're not machine.
Yeah.
So there has to be clear distinction that we need to identify this, that a biological evolution is talking millions of years.
Yeah,
That's why we are here now.
Yeah.
So that our human body, biologically, that just can't change.
No.
That is not going to change, no matter how we try, how much we try. More we try, more we're going to suffer.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening. So I think we need to find our own speed. We need to go at our own speed. We know brain is not digital, it's analog. It's manual. That's why it's better to read paperback books. It's better to actually write in a pen and paper.
Yep.
In that way you learn better, you remember more. Maybe that's why I don't have very good memory, maybe. So like our brain functions manually.
Yeah.
So understanding that, we need to go at our own speed. We don't have to keep up with the speed of the world because it's artificial, it's against us. So why are we keep doing this? We're only blind to this idea of success.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. That's why, in Fasting the Mind, in the introduction, or the first chapter, the need for speed is suicide. So once you're on that hamster wheel and you're on the, the treadmill and you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, you burn yourself out. You burn yourself out because it's not natural. Like you said, like you are like imposing a system on yourself, particularly in this day and age, right? With the technological boom that we have in the world. And so you're imposing that on yourself, like you said, and psychosomatically, we can't keep up with that. We just can't keep up with it. It's not natural. And so when we try to keep up with it, we suffer from anxiety and stress and depression. And, unfortunately, some people take their lives and so forth and so on, because it's a reality you can't have balance in.
It's a losing game, no matter what.
It is, of course.
You may achieve the goal that you wanted to achieve, but in a trade of your health and mental health, physical, mental health,
yes,
and maybe relationships too.
Exactly.
So what's more important in your life in the end?
Well, so the common question you and I get from particular people on my channel and through my website, and that is, how do you and Guy Young exist with social media and the phone and this and that? We have a very distant relationship to it.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't even have any social media, and we don't have smartphones, and so we're not hooked up 24 hours of the day to pings and twings and tweets and bleeps and all of this. Yeah, all of this nonsense, because you and I are focused on not having our mind distracted by things that are unnecessary, and keeping up with the notifications on your social media and stuff like that, it takes a lot of time and effort. And I don't know how anyone thinks that they can, even if they wanted to achieve something in their life, how can you ever achieve anything if 80% of your time is dedicated to the upkeep of your profiles on social media? It's impossible. It's really impossible. So you have to have a very distant relationship to it, for the fact of the matter that as human beings, it's through simplicity that we remain healthy and sane. It's through complexity that we go mad. And that's what we're seeing in the world today.
100%.
People have bought into the Western idea of achievement and success, which means you are existing in a complex reality. And not everyone has the aptitude or the stress levels of Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. They just don't, because those two are like mutants, right? They can work around the clock. But most of us aren't like that. We don't have a high tolerance for stress. And so it's impossible to get to their level of work ethic and achievement.
Yeah.
And you have to also remember they have millions of people working for them. So
Exactly.
when you're like you and I, we control everything I do, just two people.
Yeah.
We're not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, so we can't afford to have people helping us with what I'm doing. And so, but see, what people do is they see someone like Elon Musk, right?
Yeah.
And they go, well, if he can do it, I can do it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he can run all these companies because he's got thousands of people working underneath him. You are one person.
Yes. When you see from afar, it's like, oh, I can do it too.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
once you see what it actually really takes to do certain things, you're like, whoa, I don't know if I can do this.
You're going to go mad, right?
Yeah.
You're going to go mad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's, again, the type 2 happiness, that having the happy experience, happiness from having less, is
Yes.
that coming from what you just said about the simplicity of things, isn't it? And another thing is that having less, happiness that we experience from having less is also coming from giving as well, I think. Like, for example, having less of your own time or your own doing something. Instead, you use that time and effort to give something for other people.
Yes.
Right, like, or taking care of someone else, or do things just for others, to make them, to give them what they need, or some sort of help or anything, or that from that also we feel happiness as well. That is having less of mine,
Yes.
right, and having that simple mindset is. That's happiness that we learn from the Eastern traditions. Yeah.
Well, that's why in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains to Arjuna the three yogas of jnana, bhakti, and karma, because, jnana obviously is knowledge, the knowledge of the self, Brahman. Bhakti is having devotion, to Vishnu, and karma is selfless action. In this sense, like nishkama karma means not being attached to the fruits of your own action, but also selfless action. So like you're almost in service to the ultimate. But one of the points of the Gita is you're taking the focus off yourself, so to speak, you know what I mean? And then you care for others, which has it's a holistic perspective, see? And that's a hallmark of Eastern philosophy, because the Eastern cognition developed in group settings and communities, and they weren't individualistic like they were in Greece and so forth. So you had that, your happiness, for example, in the group, say if we're in the Yangtze River in China, if you are unhappy, the whole group's unhappy.
Yeah.
If you have lack of food, we all lack.
Yeah.
So there was always a selfless perspective in the East, and obviously that's imbued into the philosophies and the spiritual practices in the East. That's why when you look at Taoism, Buddhism, and Hinduism, and there are many sects and variations, there's still always within it this selfless aspect, And so the giving without expectation, not like we do in the modern world, right? Like I give you this, but you remember that I gave you that. You know what I mean? Just in case if I need to pick up the credit. So
like political.
Yeah, it's more political.
Yeah.
So, but like in Eastern thought, it's more about giving, and it's interesting because, like, for example, on my channel, right? Like obviously I write books and sell books, and obviously with a publisher you have to sell books and this and that. And when I put my latest book up for next year, Spiritual Freedom in the Digital Age, someone wrote, oh, look at him, he's selling for money and this and that. And it's like, well, but then someone, obviously, I don't worry about that sort of comment, but then someone wrote, doesn't he give enough away for free? Like, doesn't he give us our time and produce a lot of content for us to enjoy for free, no charge, and you're making a song and dance about a book being for money, which there are no books that are for free. I mean, only if you go to a monastery and stuff like that. But like, I mean, we could get into the illusion that people have of what we do here. They must think that I have millions of dollars and I can just afford just to give it away thousands of books, and they must think that publishers have billions of dollars that they can just give books away for free, and that's not actually how the publishing industry works. Which, we don't have to get into because that's common sense, but for some people it's rocket science. So,
people, because that's not what they're doing, they're not writing books and doing podcasts and whatnot, so they don't, not necessarily they need to know everything about it, but they often don't understand what goes into create these things, Again, it depends on the topic on the podcast, but sometimes it takes days to organize certain things, and a lot goes into actually than what people think. And again, that's lack of understanding other people's position, isn't it?
Well, as you know, I've been doing this for 13 years, night and day for minimal money, right? You know best because you've seen the evolution of my work and this and that, and people don't see actually that, So, but the reason why I continue is because this is what I love, and whatever, and it's great to interact with people, and especially through the podcast and that we've met over time. It's been really
definitely
good.
Very fulfilling.
But see, that's the difference. See, that's as you were mentioning with the two philosophies, like the two kinds of happiness is like the Western one is more about efficiency, and then the Eastern one's more based on love.
Yes.
Isn't it funny, isn't it? So one's more practical. And it's funny, I saw I didn't watch this video, but I saw this video where someone, I forget who it was an influential speaker in America, if I'm right, and they were speaking about the youth shouldn't invest in knowledge, they should invest in tools. And I thought, what a kind of sad perspective that is. And then, look, you can sympathize with what they're saying, because what they're saying is that if you invest in tools, efficiency, then that's a path to making money, you see?
Yeah.
And so everything becomes then about the economy. Everything then becomes about making money and not about having knowledge on who you are, what the nature of the world is, the deeper questions that, unfortunately, because people follow the path of efficiency, they only ask those questions on their deathbed.
Love and...
what's the nature of reality? What nature of my existence?
Ultimate questions.
The ultimate questions. Because they live in a world that invests in tools, invests in efficiency. It's a very pragmatic world, right? But then when you start to bring in philosophy and you talk about deeper, like what we do on the podcast, you get a lot of pushback from people who live in that, the achievement-based reality.
Efficiency, productive,
yeah. Because I remember I had a question from someone about 3 or 4 years ago. They said, I love what you do and I love the philosophy and Eastern philosophy, but really, what does it give me? And for me, that was a sad view.
It is.
Because you're thinking in the Western way. You're thinking
already.
You're already thinking that it has to provide you something.
It's a business, eh?
It's a business.
Because you give your attention away. I gotta get back of something. And that somewhat what you take out of that has to be like a visible or something like
something
physical.
tangible. Yeah.
But it's not about that.
It's not about that.
It's not about that.
It's about liberation. It's about freeing you from suffering. It's about the end of suffering.
Yes.
It's about an examination of why we suffer and how to end that suffering and to experience that ultimate contentment.
Yeah.
And it's not through complexity. It's not through efficiency.
Yes.
It's through, as you said, with the second kind of happiness.
Yeah, traditional and more Eastern, and it is traditional. It had come from Eastern part of the world, but I personally think that it's intrinsic to human species.
Yeah,
That it's ultimately what's natural to all of us. all of humanity, no matter what skin color where you're from.
Yeah.
Because efficiency-based happiness is only momentary. We all know it's limited. It never lasts. Again, the suffering and pain only comes from the efficiency-based happiness that we're chasing it.
Yes.
But if we stop chasing it and following a real sense of happiness, which is liberation, love, compassion, then we get to something real.
Yes.
We get some real solution, real answers that we were always looking for, right? And again, that comes from acknowledging that our being is suffering, birth of our body is birth of suffering. And acknowledging that suffering will give you understanding of others' suffering. That already kind of, you got an answer there already, right? You don't want to suffer, right? And to not to suffer is to experience love. That's why our actually most primal desire for everyone is getting loved, right? When we have the feeling of loved, everything feel good.
Good, yeah.
You're good, you're happy, right? You're happy, not because you own something, more of something.
No.
You're content, your heart feel warm,
Yep.
you're intrinsically happy and joyful and blissful, right? So that understanding suffering, and so that we don't want others to feel suffer as well, because you know how it feels like.
Yep.
So you are giving love, and again, doing that also gives you happiness as well.
Yes.
In the intrinsic, the real sense of happiness.
And all animals need love, right? Like we know this. Like and love is a unifying bond between all species, right?
Yes.
Like it's not attained from being selfish and from being self-centered.
Yes.
And from actual achievement. It's not gained by that. And it's interesting because, like, if you look at from like a lot of cognitive scientists, even though they will explain that there's two cognitive functions in the world, there's the cold cognition and hot cognition, and so there's the individualistic cognition of the West, and then there's the holistic cognition of the East. They will say, even though that exists, right, the fact of the matter is, it's not an anthropocentric universe. The universe doesn't revolve around the individual. And so at the heart of the matter, as you were mentioning, deep down, we all are holistic.
Yes.
In some sense.
Yes.
We're all holistic. But the Western cognition has become so focused on individualism that it loses sight of the fact that the individual is not special.
Yes.
And see, when you think that the individual is special, or when you think that you have, or you are important, that's where a lot of suffering occurs. But when you realize that the world doesn't revolve around you and that you're just part of something much greater than yourself, it actually alleviates a lot of anxiety and stress and depression, and it takes the focus off you, right? This is why a lot of psychologists say at the heart of the matter with depression, what is the heart of the matter? And they say it's when people overthink about themselves.
Yes.
That can be like, we can obviously, for each individual, you can sort of unpack that and see why and how they overthink about themselves. But the heart of the matter is that they are thinking too much about themselves and not about others, as you're mentioning. And this is a habit from the individual cognition, from that first kind of happiness of achievement. Oh, why do they have that and this and that? And we all unfortunately fall prey to that sometimes, because we live in a world where we constantly are comparing ourselves to people of our similar age group, or if they are better at us at a certain vocation, you know, and then we're gone then, right? We suffer, like, our suffering is perpetuated from that way of thinking.
So I think efficiency-based happiness, this idea of productiveness and achieving goals and become successful and this and that, I think so far that type of philosophy played its part, I think. And that got us to this advanced technology and science and higher level of living, and our lifestyle became, let's say, somewhat progressed. And now what's happening around the world with the increasing of anxiety problem, depression, suicide, and breaking the relationships and this and that, is the clear evidence of this way of thinking is no longer working for us, I think. So expiry date had come.
It's come, yeah.
It's come.
That's used by
I
date,
think.
probably.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
got a while back.
And again, since it's this idea is very, very, very young and new in comparison with Eastern philosophy.
Yeah.
And since Eastern philosophy is very much based on our nature, and it's actually time to go back,
Yeah.
I think. So constant pursuit of rationality in intellect has its place in acknowledging it, but not just pursuing anymore because it doesn't serve us anymore. It doesn't serve our life anymore, actually. I think our lifestyle got to a certain stage that, like, it's good enough, isn't it, really? Like, we domesticating ourselves here in the world, and we don't live in the savannas anymore. We got to a certain stage where we can feel comfortable, and what more comfortable are we looking for here, you know? But again, like a seeking itself, chasing the efficiency and productive and success and this and that, can only give us more suffering and pain and problems. And that's what's happening for almost every individual now. So that it's now time to turn back to our original state.
Yeah.
And that can only come from the Eastern and traditional way of thinking and the traditional knowledge.
Yeah. You've got to get off the hamster wheel, you know what I mean? People have got to really get off the hamster wheel and stop the chase and the hunt, as Lao Tzu would say, you know, like, because that's what's producing all of the suffering, right? Like in I think it's chapter 12 of the Tao Te Ching, where Lao Tzu mentions the chase and the hunt and talks about artificial needs as opposed to natural needs. And so it's interesting because the Western way of thinking heavily leads into artificial needs because of capitalism, as you mentioned earlier. And so we're leaning into the artificial needs because we think, oh, that's what's going to give us happiness and this and that. But it doesn't, right? And you and I recently, we watched a talk by a Thai individual, John, who runs Pun Pun Farms in Chiang Mai. And he was talking about poverty and how poverty never existed in Thailand. It wasn't a concept. It came over with Farangs, with foreigners, with Westerners particularly, who came there and said, you guys live in poverty. And they're like, what? They don't understand the concept. What do you mean? And so this capitalistic way of thinking it was slowly then beginning to infiltrate countries like Thailand and Korea and places like that, where they were perfectly fine. I always mention the story about John Perkins, the economic hitman, when he went to Indonesia and he told the Indonesian shaman, he said, you guys live in poverty. And he's like, have a look around, bro. Have a look around. There's organic food everywhere. They're living good, shanti. There's no illness. What is your idea of poverty? So your idea of poverty is if someone doesn't live in a concrete box, then they're poor. If they don't have running water, if they don't have a faucet, they're poor. If they don't have an oven, they're poor. And this is all a foreign concept when we go to the East, right? It's truly a foreign concept, right? And so we have to kind of reorient our way of thinking that's also a product of capitalism, of individualistic thinking. It doesn't really relate to a lot of these Asian cultures, And it's interesting, like, because what we're talking about, especially with suffering, as you and I know from living in Thailand, like the idea of sabai, right? Sabai is like, it's kind of like shanti. Just
take it easy.
Take it easy, man. Just chill. Life's good. Life's like, you don't have to take it too seriously. And And if you know Thai, and if you know Thai people, they will always say that Frangs think about everything too much.
Farangs complain.
Frangs complain. And it's really interesting, right? Like, because when you look at the Western cognition, because of the efficiency mindset, they're constantly in a state of complaining. How many times have you and I been in Thailand? And so we were going from Bangkok to maybe Chiang Mai, or we're going down south to the islands or something like that on a bus. And there's such a thing called Thai time, right? So if the bus is coming at 5, you and I know, well, it's probably 6:30. So, but you show up at 5 just in case, you know.
Yeah.
But you grab yourself a Thai tea or something like that. And you chill.
Something to snack on.
Something to snack on. But you know you're on Thai time. But then you see a bunch of foreigners who are like, where the hell is this bus? And why is it taking so long? They told me 5 and blah, blah, blah. And then you just see the Thai in the corner just like looking at them and like, what? Like, just take it easy, bro. Like,
Sabai.
Sabai.
Just
We'll get
relax.
there. We'll get there.
We'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there.
We'll get there.
And so really, like, especially when you live in those countries, as you and I have, it has a really positive effect, because you learn then to really take it easy and chill out and see, they're suffering. See, they're suffering from their own ideal of efficiency, their own ideal of how things should work in a mechanistic way.
Yep.
But Thailand, India, Nepal, Myanmar, Cambodia, good luck trying to implement that type of efficiency, because those places are very natural, and, you know, people are relaxed, man. They chill. And
Exactly. Again, isn't it interesting that you can experience exactly the same thing, or you can be at present moment or whatever is happening, and you can be in a complete agony, going through a lot of suffering, or you can just completely be peaceful, be happy with whatever is going on.
100%.
Right? It's just a change of perception, change of way of thinking. That's all it takes.
That's all it takes, isn't it? And then you don't suffer.
But and you will realize that, like, how silly you were, really.
Yeah.
You kind of like, well, stupid me.
Yeah.
Like,
You're just a complaining whinge-wart.
yes.
You just, for no reason at all.
Yeah.
Like, because you want everyone to be on your watch. You want everyone to do as you do. But, yeah, particularly when you travel, you notice that not on your watch, not as you do.
Yeah.
So you can either get back on the plane or you can deal with it.
Exactly.
So, and most people do deal with it.
Yeah.
And fortunately, they learn a lot from that mentality.
Yes.
And they learn how to be natural. They learn how to be selfless, you know, and to empathize with each and every situation. So
Exactly. Yeah. It's not hard. We just need to put an effort and pay attention to our own way of thinking and reassess what's happening within ourselves. Yeah.
Yes. So in the end of the day, like, suffering is an ultimate lesson for us to empathize with others in the world, right? That's one of the ultimate lessons, which is in essence is love, right? Which is in essence is in love, and you can't gain that from having a self-centered view of the world, of thinking about yourself all the time, of thinking that you are separate from everyone else. You'll never experience that reality, will you? You can't. You can never do it. You can never do it.
You can only see the world through that perception, and which isn't true reality. That's not actuality.
No.
You will only experience life in that way, in efficiency way, from that place. In the Western model.
Western model, yeah. So it's just about coming back to that simplicity, coming back to getting your mind out of that achievement. And we've got to get out of this mindset that, you know, the temporary dopamine hit that we get from achievement, it's a temporary dopamine hit. The reason why we have an ultimate state of equanimity when you choose the Eastern path is because you're not going through the fluxes and the highs like a drug addict does.
Sugar crash.
It's like a sugar crash, right?
Yeah.
But it's an achievement crash.
Yes.
So you have the achievement, and then everyone stops looking at your posts or whatever, and they don't care about what you're doing, and you have this crash, like, because you can't keep it up here.
Yes.
You can't keep it up here.
And you want to get that dopamine rush again, so that you get onto the social media, on the phone again and again, that creates the addiction.
Addiction, yeah.
Yeah.
So then we have a whole world that is addicted to achieving.
Yes. Pretty much.
Yeah. So once you're addicted to achieving, you can't how can you empathize with anyone? How can you? Because how can you?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because your attention is looking here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. There are a lot of individuals just basically give up on themselves, almost.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. But you've got to really try to get out of that habit of the chase and the hunt.
Yep.
Come back into alignment with simplicity. Get out of complexity, and don't fool yourself, as I said, into this idea that you need to achieve to be happy. If you achieve, all well and good. If you don't achieve, all well and good too. It's all good.
I was listening to this lecture, a little bit like with your video, aimlessness and having no goal is why that's actually natural to us. So having a dream is going to only make us suffer, this lecturer was saying. Don't worry about dreams and goals. Don't have one. Just live your life, live everyday life in a harmonious way and be content with your own life and experience happiness from little things. Be grateful about little things. The little things maybe you achieve in a day. Be happy with that. But don't have this glamorous idea that you're going to be gonna go to Mars or you're gonna achieve something and I'm gonna become the richest man in the world and this kind of grandeur idea. Don't worry about that kind of dreams because it's not natural to us. And again, like you mentioned before, not everybody can do these things. We are every individual is different. We need to know that.
Yeah. I heard one Buddhist monk say once that, and there's a lot of nuance to this description, but someone said, how should I be like in this life, like, if we don't chase goals and this and that? And he said, like, do you really know how to live though? And the person is taken back, like, what do you mean? Like, do you know how to live? And then it's like, well, I go to work and have these goals and this and that. And he's like, well, having goals is not, you're not living through, you can't live if you have goals. And so he asked the monk, like, how should I be then? And he said, you should be like a dead piece of wood floating down the river.
Great.
And so, for a Westerner to hear that, it's pretty mind-blowing. What, like just a lifeless thing just floating down the river?
Pointless living.
Yeah, pointless living from their perspective.
Yep.
Because it throws up that first kind of happiness. It circumvents that first type of happiness. But the monk is saying that, but look, you see it as a dead piece of wood, right? And you think that it has no life and this and that. But it's one with the river. It moves as one with the river. It doesn't fight the river. It knows how to live. Do you see? So you've got to die to this idea of the person you think you are so that you can live. And when you die to the idea of the person you think you are, goals and this and that, if they're there, if they exist, they exist. If they don't, doesn't matter.
But then I think a lot of cases will be like that you will realize all these goals and achievements that you wanted to achieve in your mind wasn't really yours.
No, that's a great point.
It's actually, again, the same lecturer was saying, you want to become, let's say, computer scientist. If that's your goal, go and do it. And give everything you have and do it. But once you achieved, when you got there, look inside how you feel. If you feel empty, that wasn't your dream.
Exactly. Yep,
It was someone else's dream.
You
lived for someone else's dream to come true.
Yep.
So, but again, ironically, he said that to be able to know it, you need to achieve some sort of goals in life to realize what's really yours.
Yep.
And nevertheless, we know a lot of goals and achievements come from usually our parents, right? When we grow up, this job in the future is going to give you a lot of money and stability and this and that. So go this path or that path. That's how we internalize these goals and the success and idea, things like that. But at the end of the day, as what you mentioned about that a monk said to just be a dead piece of wood floating around the river, that when you actually become that dead piece of wood and experience that floating around the river, that you realize all these goals and achievements, success that you had in your mind weren't really yours.
No.
That wasn't really for you.
No.
Your life was something completely different. Yeah.
It's a byproduct of socialization, right? And that's like most people have their goals, their dreams, their beliefs, everything like that cultivated by socialization, pop culture and this and that. This is why the so-called, when people say that they're expressing their authentic self through these social media forms and this and that, it's not really them. And see, that's what the Korean lecturer was speaking about, because, and he's a hard-hitting sort of individual, but he's an honest individual.
Very.
And you know what I mean? And we've spoken about this on the podcast before, which we've got a lot of people push back on, because the very thought that your motivations are not your motivations,
Yes.
it really strips a rug out from underneath people's feet. But when you're a contemplative person, you actually start to realize that, wait up, why do I even why do I even have that goal?
Exactly.
And how did that even enter my mind? And then you analyze the environment you're in, the people you're around, and you're like, wow, it's not even an intrinsic drive to myself. It's something I gained from society.
Yes.
So it's empty, right? But what we can say about the Eastern path is, because you're the dead piece of wood, is you're just concentrating on living. And you can't have a negative experience from just living, pure living, without goals and this and that.
Yeah.
You eat, you have a laugh when there's a laugh, you know what I mean? And you just live.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to think about.
Yeah. And that place is completely stripping off the sense of I, isn't it?
Yep.
You just become that piece of wood, that you just carry this form of life because you were here with this physical form without I, right?
Yes.
Again, if birth of suffering was birth of I, and birth of happiness is death of I, right? Like,
well said.
that's pretty simple. Actually.
Simple, isn't it? All right, guys, we hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you guys next time.